I come from the Lower East Side of New York. 73 years ago, it was sort of a Jewish ghetto. Now, of course, it's become gentrified. I see all those restaurants advertising, and I realize where they are because I can figure out the street numbers and names where I went to school, where my friends were, where my grandmother lived. It was a wonderful little world. It was very much like Fiddler on the Roof in a lot of ways. And in that element, I really didn't fit in that great. I was really unathletic, and years ago I found out why. When I bought contact lenses, I'm very badly nearsighted, and I have poor hand and eye coordination. But I got tired of being the last one to be picked on the teams when I was picked at all, so I kind of retreated into my books. When I got into junior high school, somebody told me about something called the Metropolitan Opera broadcast that were on Saturday afternoon from December to about April, roughly 20 weeks. And I got involved in them. I was involved in them for many years. It brought a lot of beauty and wonder into my life. And I encountered a lot of voices that I loved. And the one that I fell in love with most of all was Zinka Milanov, who I thought had the most beautiful voice in the whole world, until my daughter started singing, and then it was a close call. Milanov had a magnificent, magnificent voice. And I became a standee. I started going I was already in college. I went a few times standing. I went by myself starting about 1956. And I didn't know anybody there, so I would just get on the line and I'd listen while people spoke. And if I was able to, I got a ticket and I went in. I went several times. I did this for a few years until I got out of college and I got out of graduate school. And then one night I met somebody whom I recognized from the line, and I started talking to him. And he introduced me to a lot of people on the standees line. This was about 1959. And for the next 5 years, I was part of a little clique, sort of like an extended family. We knew each other. We knew the singers. It was a world I don't think even exists anymore. It was wonderful 5 years. 1964, I got married, and my wife did not want to stand at the opera. She didn't mind. We stood for the Broadway theater a lot of times, but she didn't really want to stand for the opera, so occasionally we went standing. And I, who had for many years, I'd gone once or twice a week to the opera standing, suddenly I had a new life, a new social life, and I didn't stand anymore. But I still had the Metropolitan Opera broadcast, and I still had Zinka Milanov. And in those days, the tape recorder would come in. Like everybody else, I taped a lot of broadcasts, which I had. I stopped going to the Milanov performances about 1964 or 5 because I got tired of explaining to my wife that here, this was a woman who'd been singing at the Met since 1937, and I was hearing her with ears from 1950 and 51. And Zinka really, she was just a few years from retirement. And in the last 2 or 3 years that she sang I Didn't Go, I really wanted to remember her. I went back for the farewell. She sang Chenier and with Tucker, and they gave her a bowl. And I have the broadcast on tape somewhere.
I like to say goodbye, and that I loved you so many years with all my heart, and I'm always going to love you. And I have you and will carry you with me as long as I live. Goodbye.
And the final duet was magnificent.
Abbracciami, abbracciami, abbracciami.
And then 2 nights later was the closing concert at the Met, and I heard that, and she sang the Chenier again. It was her spot next to closing, and she brought down the house. And later on, she went on to teach, and she saved a lot of voices. Crystal Ludwig went to her when she had problems, and Regine Crespin went to her when she had problems, and she saved the voices. Bunbury studied Gioconda with her and then sang it in Newark and several others. And then Zinka went on to become a teacher for a year at Indiana University. I have wonderful memories of the standing room in the old Met. I saw some really great performances. I saw some crap too. But on the whole, I saw a lot of great performances. And years later, I started standing again. I stood for the Ring Cycle about 5 years ago. I stood for the Ring Cycle in '88, and 5 years ago would have been about 2006. There was a Ring Cycle. I stood for that one. The one in 1988, the Saturday broadcast, was a Saturday matinee. It was the first time they'd done the Gert Damrung in there. And I went there, and the curtain went up, and the Norn scene started, and it was Mignon Dunn singing the first Norn. And I felt as if time had suddenly moved all the way back to about 1959-60, when Mignon was singing the first and second Norn in Gerda Damrung, and Jean Madeira was singing the first Norn. I thought I'd come full circle, and I felt wonderful. It's what music and opera has pretty much always done for me. It was a wonderful feeling. And there was Mignon again. After all these years, she was still singing. And I was still standing on the standing rail in 1988. And I came back a few more times on the rail. And a few weeks ago, I wanted to see Pic Dame, but my friend, we've stayed, there's a man and a woman, I couldn't bring them with me today, they were busy. We were standees on the line in those years. I met Catherine there through her brother, who was a standee, and then she met Bill on the line. They got married. We're still friends after all these years. And Bill and I go to the record collectors once a month. You've seen me there. Then we go out to eat, and we sit and dish everybody in the music world, just like we did 50 years ago when we were standees at the old Met, and we used to go across the street to the Governor cafeteria to get out of the cold and bitch about everybody else on the line and everywhere else. So I'm still doing it. And he didn't want to stand. So we bought tickets for Peak Dom, and we got box seats, and we were standing anyway because you couldn't see the stage unless you stood. So I ended up standing for the Peak Dom, and it's a wonderful opera, and it's a beautiful, beautiful production. And I wanted to see Dolores Zajic as the old countess, so I did. So here I am, I guess, after all the years, I'm still standing. And I like it. It makes me feel young. The last couple of times I listened to the people on the standing rail talking, and I can't believe some of the conversations. They're raving about performances that I consider absolute crap. I mean, I sound like, when I started going on to the Met, there were all those people there who said, oh, you should have heard Elizabeth Rathberg, and you should have heard Rosa Puncel. And now I'm doing it. You should have heard Birgit Nilsson. You should have heard Joan Sutherland. You should have heard Zinka Milanov. It makes me feel a little more like a dinosaur, but I can't believe some of the performances they're enjoying. I went to see a Ring. I thought it was a lousy performance. I thought everybody on stage didn't know what the hell they were doing. And I'm thinking to myself, my God, what would you say, hey, if you heard Astrid von Eye sing this? What would you say if you heard Nilsson sing? What you even said if you heard Margaret Harshaw sing this? She was a hell of a lot better. But I guess it's their time, and that was my time. The first opera I saw Zinka in was Ernani. I happened to fall into that, and it was the first broadcast. And the only thing I knew of Ernani was Ernani and Volami. I'd heard the Puncel recording. Mario got through, and it came to Zinka, and there she was singing Ernani and Volami. Enjoyed it. I didn't know it that much. I saw it one more time. I also managed to see her last Aida that she ever sang in the house. She sang it that year. And another of my favorites was there, Fedora Barbieri. I like the lower voices, the sopranos, the mezzos, the contraltos. I like Barbieri, and I liked Stignani. And when you get down to the contraltos, I liked Elmo and the Madeira and Luigi Lucchese, and I saw her debut. It was incredible. I saw her. Mignon Dunn I liked, but Mignon was more of a beautiful mezzo, and she sang some wonderful things. She sang in Morena in the last, when they revived that production, the last one around with Boris. She was excellent. I'd seen her do it, of course, 40 years ago when she was substituting on a broadcast, I think, for Blanche Tebaldi. But she came along and she did beautiful things. And there was Fedora singing on Neris, and she decided to wear her costumes from the Arena de Verona. The costumes in the second act had spikes on the shoulders. Don't ask me why. They're about 6 feet wide in each direction. Now in Verona, they must have been wonderful because of the stage. She couldn't get on stage at the Met. She couldn't come forward. So there we were watching the triumphal scene, and here comes Amneris on stage sideways. That's how the audience, it was funny. And she got on the throne, and the triumphal scene went on, and they brought on Geoffrey Holder. They carried him out on a shield. Now he's about 7 feet tall, and he was dressed in feathers. I'm not making this up. It was a costume made of feathers. And Zinka Milanov you have to see, she just looked at him, not quite a double take, but she just looked at him like, who is this person, my dear, you know? Anyway, they got through that, the what do you call it, the march and everything else, and they got to the last part of the triumphal scene where, what's that? And there it starts up, something Schiava, you're in my power. I forgot how words go in Italian. And the triumphal ensemble starts. And they all start singing. Now this was a rarity. Milanov sang the triumphal scene. Every performance, she sang it. Most of the other sopranos don't. They save it. She sang it, and Fedora sang it, and you had to hear it. They made local history. It was wonderful. And it was her last Aida in the house. I had tickets a couple of years later. She canceled. She never sang it again. But I saw other things. That would have been 56, 57. It was Callas' first year at the Met. Oh, I got to see Maria Callas finally. I had heard her on the Cetra. She did the recital. She sang Qui la Voce and Suicidio and the Tristan. And somehow I had heard the Gioconda, and I had heard about her, and I wanted to see it. And I went to the stage, and I went to the opera. It was a Saturday night. Somehow I got in, and she was thin like my finger. She had lost all this weight. She was a thin woman, and she had almost no voice. And Barbieri hated her. They had been feuding. And Kurt Baum hated her since Mexico. He was singing Poglione that night. In the second act finale, after the Tremors, they stood each on side of her. They grabbed one of her arms, each one of them. She could have been doing pantomime. You couldn't even hear her. They blasted her off the stage. It really wasn't Norma, but it was exciting to see it. I got to see that. And that season I also saw, what's her name? Tebaldi came. She came to sing Traviata. And I never understood why they all kept carrying on. She was great. I thought she was wonderful. She was beautiful. She was wonderful. She sang magnificently. She and Leonard Warren in the second act of Traviata were a miracle. It was beautiful music, beautiful voices. And they laid her out on the standing room. I didn't understand why. She never sang it again at the Met. Next year she changed it, she sang Desdemona. But she was beautiful in that. And the third act, every Verdi opera really has an ensemble that calls for a voice of almost heroic proportions, which I call a Verdi soprano. And you usually get lighter voiced sopranos singing Traviata. The fourth act really calls for a dramatic. But in the third act, you need a big voice. Tebaldi brought that voice. Alfredo, she did it. She cut through it all. It was wonderful. She was wonderful, Violetta. And even the following year when she sang Desdemona, she was a marvelous Desdemona. And as much as I like her, the only one for me who ever sang the third act of Otello correctly was Zinka. And I know I'm prejudiced. I saw Zinka's first Desdemona. I think it's 1958. She had 2 or 3 at the end of the year. Tebaldi was singing them. The next year it was Victoria sang them. And the following year, Milanov was supposed to have them, but Mario got mad at Bing and they substituted Tosca. I'll come back to that. It was, and I remember it was St. Patrick's Day, because when I was waiting outside the Met, you had groups going on singing Harrigan. They were all happy. My friend we went to NYU. He was on the paper, and he had done a review of the Met. We went to a performance at which Uzunov lost his voice during, Bergunzi lost his voice during Celestaida. And they brought Uzunov on, and Bernie had written a paper on it, and the Met sent him free tickets to review some of the performance. We saw Vanessa like that, and we saw the Otello, and the house went dark, and Claver came out, and he brought the downbeat and this crash with the thunder that opens Otello. And the curtains opened, this tall chorister came running across the stage, waving a cross, and on stage came Mario Del Monaco, who I also loved from the broadcast. Now, Mario was maybe 5 feet tall. He wore platform shoes 3 inches deep. Don't laugh. They called him Carmen Miranda's. He wore them, and Giulietta Siminato wore them too, in Amneris. Not in Cavalleria, she wore them in Amneris. Anyway, Mario came out and started Esultate, and you knew this was going to be a night of nights. he sang it, and he walked off stage. And Warren started it's brief recitative, then it's Fuoco di Gioia, and then the scene, the drinking song, and then the fight that starts, and Otello comes back on, and as he came out, there was a big center staircase. In back of him, this beautiful blonde woman came out. I didn't know for a minute who it was, because Zinka was always in red hair. She did her own hair, and she was a redhead. But there was this blonde standing there. And he came down the stage, down the stairs, and he finished this bit, dismissed them all, and the love music starts. And he walked up the staircase, and he held out his hand to her, and she came forward, and I realized it was Milanov. She was wearing a nightgown sort of thing with a red velvet over bodice. I still remember it. And she started to sing. In all the years I heard her, she never sounded more beautiful. Exciting love duet, and they were talking about it outside. She was the leading soprano of the Met. They never gave her a staging rehearsal. They barely gave her a piano rehearsal. And from what one of the people was saying, she never sang with Delmonico till that night in that particular opera. And they started to sing. It was like heaven. The curtain came down, and there was an explosion. We went on to the second act, and it starts, and you have the credo, and she has a song, the thing with the children, and she starts singing to him, and he's getting angry and angry in the script, and she runs off. And he starts singing sangue, sangue, and he dropped to his knees and started singing Si pel cielo. Si piacere al mare giura, per le carte fai cari. The sound was unbelievable. Warren walked up to him, put his hand on his shoulder to hold him down, and he started his bit. and Claver's whipping up the orchestra. The curtain came down. It was like a football game. You have no idea. It was like cheering. They got on to the third act, the trio, the bit in the armory, and then he has a scene with Milanov, and he threw her on the floor, and she ran off again. And then they came in the big hall with the Venetian ambassadors, and they start this. Now, this is not Verdi ensemble. It's in its own way. It's like the triumphal scene. You need a dramatic soprano. I love Eleanor Steba. I love Licia. I love Victoria. All of them, and even Tebaldi, who had a big enough one. But it was the first time I ever heard it like that. She, in many ways, we had Warren, big voice. You had Delmonico, big voice, and you had this woman balancing out the ensemble. And you can laugh at it, but you really had to hear it. You never really got, in too many of these performances, all stars. And when you heard all the voices together, it sounded different. She did the same thing years later, Milanov, when she sang Boca Negra. The triumphal scene, I heard it. I heard it mostly on the radio. Varney sings it. Rethberg sings it. I forget who else sings it. And Tebaldi sings it. But you had to hear it. Da da da. She's singing Pacha, and it's cutting through everything, and up till the end where she has this trill, and then she sings the diminuendo pianissimo. You have to hear somebody like that. It was really it. And she did that in the Otello. And in the last act, she sang beautifully the Salce and the Ave Maria. And then he came in and he killed her. And when he killed her, he left her hanging half off the bed. And she wasn't a young woman, and she was a big woman. And he had 10 more minutes of Otello, and she couldn't move. And she just laid there. They had to hold the curtain at the end to get her up and around. But when they came out, the three of them, for those calls, it was a wonder the paint didn't peel off the seat. It was one of the most magnificent nights I ever spent in the opera. And I heard it so many times. She never really... I heard it do his Dema again, but it was never like that. It was just a night of magic.